I'll tell you something else about Venezuela. There's an opposition party there. There are people that could probably take over Venezuela and not be a major narco-terrorist state. So
they probably would have to take to the streets and protest.
They're in our own. I wouldn't if I were them with Maduro in charge.
That's what
they're in our own hemisphere.
Yeah,
they're sending drugs.
Abby Phillip on her CNN show went head-to-head with two MAGA stooges, Scott Jennings and Lance Trover, over the idea that Donald Trump is the anti-war president, the America First president, when Donald Trump is actively bombing Venezuelan fishing boats. So we're going to take a look at these clips from this panel discussion on Abby Phillip's CNN show with Scott Jennings, Lance Trover, and the rest. I'm going to have my opinions to add. That's what I'm doing here. And then I want to know what you think in the comments section. Let's check it out.
Is the America First no-war president itching for a fight with another country? Tonight, 2 people are in military custody after surviving a U.S. strike on a suspected drug boat with ties to Venezuela. It's the 6th known strike in Trump's war against drug traffickers, and it follows a major Pentagon shakeup that saw the top admiral in charge of the mission abruptly step down. Sources tell CNN his resignation was over tensions with his boss, Pete Hegseth. Now, this week, Trump publicly declared he authorized a covert CIA operation inside of Venezuela. All of this culminating into this message that he delivered today to Venezuela's strongman leader, a warning to any kids watching.
He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to fuck around with the United States.
Well, there's that. But look, I mean, I think a lot of people are asking today, what happened to being anti-globalist? Eric Erickson writes, a lot of people who bemoan globalists are pretty quiet today about the president shifting into regime change posture over Venezuela.
Well, I don't think that it's impossible to, or against the ethos of the MAGA movement. If you've been handed some of these issues, like from Joe Biden that Donald Trump has, that doesn't put you in violation of the Make America First movement. And certainly, if you're dealing with that stuff coming in, like you can't, I mean, it's not. I guess my point is that you can't. It's not. No, go ahead. Sorry. Sorry.
I don't know if this is like because it's hard to defend it or what, but I do think that there are some questions, Scott.
Yeah, Abby Phillip is being very politic here. Abby Phillip is great. I think Abby Phillip does a good job of holding these people's feet to the fire, but I do often wish that she was more stringent about it. And this is one of those times. I mean, that's exactly the problem here. Is it's such an absurd idea that this guy, Lance Trover, can't even get it out. It's indefensible. It's absurd on its face, and it's absurd underneath its face. This guy, Lance Trover, I mean, I wasn't aware of him before seeing him on Abby Phillip's CNN show, but he looks to me, he makes this face that we're seeing here. He just looks like a guy that smelled a dirty diaper. It's sus. Like, that's the way I would name that face. Sus. What a clown.
I mean, Trump and a lot of his base, Trump ran in 2016. I was there against being involved in foreign wars. He just went to the Middle East this spring and said regime change has been a policy that failed in that region. So why is he seemingly engaging in that same kind of policy now and then not going to Congress and asking for authorization?
Legitimate question. I think Venezuela is a different kind of country. It's not really a real country. It's a narco-terrorist state. In his first term, he unleashed economic sanctions on them. We put a bounty on Maduro. I mean, we did all the things short of going to war with Venezuela to stop them from importing drugs into the United States. It did not work. They have continued to be a narco-terrorist state. They continue to flood drugs into the United States and dangerous people. And so one of the things about the America First movement and the MAGA movement is in Middle America, they believe our government has not taken a hard enough line against people who have put deadly drugs into this country. They promised this. And honestly, I think he's going to have a lot of political support for stopping these narco-terrorists.
Couple of quick MAGA shill tells. Scott Jennings started off by saying, that's a valid point. When a MAGA propagandist concedes, okay, this is actually worth addressing, you know they're in hot water. You know they're about to weave some spectacular BS because they have to set the stage by saying like, all right, let's get brass tacks here about a reasonable question. When they think they can successfully paint an alternate reality picture, they just come in attack mode. They're just like, you don't love this country, and blah, blah, blah. So when they start by being like, all right, well, that's a valid question, you know they're bleeding because it's going to be a spectacular lie. And then the other one I want to point out is that, people in middle, they speak for the people. So without citing poll data or any evidence of this, he asserts that middle America, right? Half of this country, more than half of this country, whatever counts as middle America, but the beating heart of this country believes this. And I don't know that is accurate at all. I would love to see polling numbers that shows that as air quotes middle America's priority in any way, shape, or form.
I do think that it's politically convenient to lay at the feet of Venezuela the drug problem that we have in this country, but it also is not aligned with the facts. According to the United States' own, assessments, Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations are primarily responsible for the supply of illicit drugs, including fentanyl, to the U.S. market. Venezuela is not really a player in fentanyl, which is the predominant killer of Americans in terms of drugs. But what is a problem is that Venezuela is a failed state that is run by a dictator. And if the agenda is to regime change and to get rid of a dictator, I'm sure there are many Americans, Democrat and Republican, who support Maduro going bye-bye. But that should be what Trump says, not blaming it on drug trafficking, which is a relatively minor issue compared to drug trafficking that comes from Mexico.
Well, how much do you want to accept? I think you're downplaying.
I know, it's not a how much do you want to accept.
I think you're downplaying.
Where is the problem coming from? And it's coming from Mexico.
I think you're downplaying what they do in Venezuela, A. B.
I'm not downplaying it. It's just factually less significant than what is happening in Mexico.
B. I would support military strikes on drug operations in Mexico, to be honest with you, and I think a lot of Americans would as well.
Again, there's that slips in this assertion that a lot of Americans would, like I'm speaking for the people here. I don't know. I'd like to see some polling data on that. Right now, I think this administration has given us some bigger domestic fish to fry. Ask the farmers what their top concern is at the moment. Ask a soybean farmer. But I mean, Abby Phillips makes an excellent point here. Look at Google it up yourself. Fentanyl is a serious problem in America. How much of that is coming from Venezuela? And I don't want to what about things here, but if this is a really, would it astonish you to tell you that to inform you that there is a significant oil interest in Venezuela? Does this country have any history of waging conflict over oil? I don't know. Probably not worth digging into. But I agree wholeheartedly with Abby Phillips here. Something just seems totally miscalibrated. You're blowing up these boats. I would also posit that this serves a dual purpose, whatever leverage they're trying to do with Maduro and Venezuela. The blowing up, the extrajudicial just blowing up of boats of another nation and saying it's narco-terrorism, and you've declared them an enemy and you're waging war on them without congressional oversight or approval. That is also testing a border, right? I mean, if they can get away with this and normalize this, then they can sort of point at other boats and say, well, these were also terrorist boats. And then if they're closer to our shores, or maybe they're on our own soil, right? It's all about softening up these hard lines that are basically like, this is okay, that's not okay. This is legal, that's not legal. They're trying to create this kind of quasi-gray area where it's like, well, it wouldn't be legal if it was just a sovereign nation's, like an ally's patrol boat in their water. But this is a hostile nation's drug boat. Drugs cartels are terrorists. We're anti-terrorists. Therefore, we can blow them up. It's a little bit of a gray area, but trust me, they were bad people. And if we're like, well, I don't like it, but okay, then there's another line, right? If you let the bully take your lunch money today, he's going to want your lunch money tomorrow. Sooner or later, he's going to want your lunch money and your sneakers, right? It's just this, you got to get your victim acclimated to worse and worse stuff. That's not very well put, but you see what I'm getting at.
Point, Scott, is that this doesn't seem to really be about the drugs. I think it's about Maduro. And if it's about Maduro, don't you think Americans ought to
they're
know
one and the same. He is a drug lord. I mean,
don't you think Americans ought to know that if that's the agenda, regime change, that that's what they're doing?
The U.S. Senate does, and it's so much so that they had a vote today that was voted down with Democrats and Republicans trying to say you should not send ground forces into Venezuela. Like they think the U.S. Senate, not Chuck Roach and not Middle America, but the U.S. Senate had that vote.
Yeah,
because they're trying to stop it.
A bipartisan one, including Rand Paul that signed on.
They are a major proponent of moving cocaine into this country and fentanyl. I mean, they are a major driver. So
they're not a major driver of fentanyl, and fentanyl is what is killing Americans.
They are a major driver of drugs into this country. That's not debatable that they're pushing.
I'm just saying fentanyl is what is killing Americans in droves. I'm talking about the seriousness of the problem. Fentanyl is killing Americans at extraordinary numbers, and they're not a major player in the fentanyl trafficking.
I think there's a couple issues happening right here. I think we can all agree we have a drug problem in America and that we wanted to stop. I think the question is military strikes, is that the best way to do it? And if it is, does it need some authorization by Congress? And to bring it back to the first session, I think that could be potentially an issue why some of these people are going out tomorrow, because it feels like the president is doing an overreach. It's not that trying to stop fentanyl, trying to stop cocaine from coming into this country isn't something that probably we all can unify around. It's about the overreach of this administration. And I think why you are doing something matters, and it feels like there's a little throw the rock, hide your hand behind your back here.
We have spent zillions of dollars trying to stop the drug trade in this country. And the war on drugs has been going on for decades in this country. And what has happened? We have it pouring in over time.
But we can't go to war with everybody.
A family who's lost someone to drug overdose, are they really that upset that a drug narco guy's blown up in the water?
Let me just play. I just want to play this because I think it's interesting to kind of hear Trump in his own words talking about globalists that he argued that he hated so much.
The entire globalist concept must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. The future does not belong to globalists. For decades, you watched as one globalist politician after the next sold you out. The globalists have been wrong about everything. The big globalists have been ripping off the United States. We're going to get the warmongers and the globalists out of our government.
Does that even have meaning anymore? Did it ever? I don't know. I mean,
I don't think so. You know, I ran a lot of campaigns against Donald Trump, but to my Republican friends' points, he's not talking about it in the way now that he did then, and he's wrapping this thing in drugs and narcos, which anybody would say, no, we don't want drugs. We don't care if narcos get killed. Even Democrats don't care as long as there's some kind of process and not innocent people getting killed. But to your point, he sounds just like a globalist.
What are we going to do with those guys that we captured? What laws apply to them? Where are they going?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know. And I'm not sure that I care all that much. I'll tell you something else about Venezuela. There's an opposition party there. There are people that could probably take over Venezuela and not be a major narco-terrorist state. So
they probably would have to take to the streets and protest.
They're in our own. I wouldn't if I were them with Maduro in charge.
That's what
they're in our own hemisphere.
Yeah,
they're sending drugs.
Sounds like you're making a globalist argument, Scott.
Well, I mean,
we know that there are.
I have no opposition to using the U.S. military to stopping terrorists from putting substances in our country that kill our citizens. If it was Al Qaeda, I'd say the same thing.
We know that there's opposition in Venezuela, and she just won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. And look, that's a.
I have no opposition to using the U.S. military to stopping terrorists from putting substances in our country that kill our citizens. If it was Al Qaeda, I'd say the same thing.
Okay, so a few things here. Scott Jennings saying the quiet parts out loud. What are we going to do with those people, asks Abby Phillip. Scott Jennings saying, I don't know that I care all that much, right? This is MAGA to a T. Don't pay attention to the details. We got to get the bad guys, and we got to use muscle on the bad guys, right? That's how you get stuff done. You bring power to bear, and don't worry about the details. And some people might be like, well, sometimes you got to use the stick. The slippery part is definitely the details. Who are the bad guys? Who gets to define who the bad guys are? Because we got a president right now who lumps together the bad guys, anyone he considers an opponent, right? So he has said Antifa is a terrorist organization, and set aside for a moment the fact that Antifa is not an organization. They've compared Antifa to Hamas or Al-Qaeda. I mean, these organizations have leaders. I'm not defending those terrorist organizations. But, Antifa is more of a concept than it is an official organization. You go from there to being the radical left, to calling the moderate left the radical left, to calling anybody who criticizes Trump or any of his policies as radical. That's not too many hops to calling American citizens who disagree with Donald Trump terrorists. And we're blowing up these boats. We're saying, well, those are narco boats and the narco people are terrorists. So you're blowing up terrorist boats. Now I guess we're using force against terrorists without judicial approval, without congressional approval. Well, wait a minute. If we're not far away from American citizens who disagree with Trump being terrorists, I mean, you see where I'm going with this, right? And you can be like, oh, you're being ridiculous. Well, I just did a video with Chris Cuomo and Mehdi Hassan, and Chris Cuomo is playing the like, oh, Mehdi, let's not be extreme card. But here we are. I have referenced the authoritarian playbook many times before in many videos, and other people talk about it much more eloquently than I do. Search that up if you want a blow-by-blow academic breakdown of how democracies have slid into authoritarianism in other countries, contemporary countries. This is happening. And there's been a long, American exceptionalist viewpoint of well, that couldn't happen here. Wake up, look around. I'm not being alarmed. By the time it's undeniable, it's too late, right? And so I would argue that it's undeniable now. I hope that it's not too late. I certainly don't want open conflict. I don't want a civil war in this country if we can avoid it. They're still aggressively trying to gerrymander. They're clearly trying to influence the midterm elections. They don't want to lose the House. It's happening, folks. And I think Scott Jennings, there are two things. Things like him saying, I don't particularly care, establishes this kind of sane-washing mantra of that's not important, nothing to see here, don't worry about this. These extreme things are just normal, they're business as usual. Don't be a henny penny, relax. Just let it happen. We're trying to help. We're the good guys. And that's one thing it's doing. And the other thing it's doing is explicitly stating that is not important, right? So habeas corpus, these things that are part of our Constitution, it's the framework of justice in America, not important. And I think that previously, MAGA was afraid to say that part out loud. I think that has been true all along, that has not been a priority for them. But they're now feel emboldened enough that they are saying it out loud. You have Stephen Miller having his slip on live air the other day talking about plenary authority. That is literally the stuff of kings. Plenary authority is unchecked, unfettered, unaccountable authority, and that's what a monarch has. That's what a king has. And he froze because I think, I'm not supposed to say that out loud yet. This is a watered down version of that. I don't think it matters that much. And it is a normal, it's evidence of the normalization, and it is a concerted effort at pushing the envelope of normalcy on that. So I got a little, lost in the weeds on that, but I hope I made that clear. He says these things like conversational throwaways, but it is a strategy of these folks to work that in there. It's not one of the most inflammatory things that people like Scott Jennings say. So you pick your battles. It's a fire hose. It's like this lie, that lie, this whopper of a lie, and then also some sort of gravelly stuff that I'll get in there to just normalize the fact that this abnormal stuff is part of our day-to-day now. And you got to pick the thing. And most people take the bait and they go after the whopper of a lie. And what happens is the two medium lies and the handful of gravel-sized normalcy lies, including the quiet part out loud stuff, just gets written into the record without being challenged. And you go, okay, well, you can't not address the whopper of the lie. That's true. That's true. But the downside of these conversational things of platforming these propagandists is they get to erode away. They get to write onto the record as just part of a pleasant conversation, this extremely radical stuff of like, I don't think it matters that much. It does. It does matter. It matters the most, arguably. It is the literal fabric of what makes America so remarkable. The concept of habeas corpus is quite remarkable in the world. And I think that if you look at a Ronald Reagan talking about the shining city on the hill, it is things like guaranteeing habeas corpus as part of our Constitution and standing by it and upholding it. That is one of the pillars of that concept. So when we start to be like, well, I don't think it matters that much. I mean, I don't like the people it's happening to, so screw them. That's it. That's the sound of habeas corpus going out the window, because if they can do it to anyone, they can do it to anyone, including you, including me, anyone they don't like. If they can pick anybody, even the worst among us, and not uphold habeas corpus. And I think you say, well, habeas corpus is about people who are here and they're blowing up boats out in the water. Okay, you're splitting hairs, and they're not meaningless hairs. I get it. But you start somewhere and you erode inward. And it's happening again and again and again. And, I think Mehdi Hassan and Chris Cuomo in that conversation, I know there's a totally other video, but I just did it recently, really underscored that for me, the danger of the comfortable thinking of like, oh, well, surely they won't go that far. They will, and they are. They will, and they are. Listen to Stephen Miller speak. Stephen Miller writes, when Trump talks in his word salad, it's one thing. When he's reading a speech, you can hear it in his voice. He is reading the words that someone else. I don't do a good Trump. I apologize. It's the language of Stephen Miller, and it is the language of authoritarianism. We have to see it for what it is, because it's much easier to stop it before it completely tips and the elections are blown and he's there in a third term and ICE is the police force out marching around in our streets looking for, anybody who disagrees. Then there are fewer options, right? And those options are more painful. So let me know what you think about all this in the comments.